The sequel trilogy is no doubt still the hottest point of debate among Star Wars fans. No matter how much of a fan you are, whether a hardcore fan since as long as you remember, or a new fan only recently introduced to the series, chances are you have your opinions on the sequel trilogy. Now that the sequel trilogy is complete, capping off the Skywalker saga, at least for now, how do I feel looking back on it all? I saw The Force Awakens opening night and absolutely loved it. I loved the new characters, I loved the story despite how similar it was to A New Hope, I loved the returning emphasis on practical effects, I loved it all. Looking back on it now, I do still think it's a damn good film, and a very good Star Wars film, but I do notice the flaws more and more with each subsequent rewatching. While it's a great reintroduction to the universe of Star Wars, it doesn't really deepen the lore all that much either. Now, that's not a major problem, as I don't think the primary focus of a Star Wars film should be building the lore so much as just telling a good story and being a competently put together film. Look at Attack of the Clones, my least favorite Star Wars film. Does it get an A in the world building and deepening of the lore? Absolutely. Does it get an A in the filmmaking department? No. But for many Star Wars fans, especially fans like me that grew up with the prequels, world building is a top priority. The film itself doesn't necessarily have to be good as long as it's got depth. The prequels definitely succeeded when it comes to world building and depth, but not as much when it comes to character, dialogue, direction, and the more technical aspects of filmmaking. The Force Awakens certainly gets an A as a film, but maybe a B- in terms of world building. However, what The Force Awakens lacks in world building, it more than makes up for with its compelling characters. Rey, Poe, Finn, and Kylo Ren all have some of the most solid first appearances in Star Wars films. Each character has their own struggles, doubts, desires, and fears. Especially Rey and Kylo, who are my favorite element of this film. They don't share a ton of screen time together, but the time they do share is extremely compelling. Why? Because they feel like real people, not caricatures or character types. Take two characters from the prequels and sequels and look at them. Let's take Mace Windu and Finn. Both characters have large supporting roles, although I'd argue that Finn is more of a main player. Ask yourself, just from watching the films, not the shows, not the books or comics, just the films, what do we really know about Mace Windu? Well, we know he's one of the top Jedi in the Order, we know he's stubborn, we know he's an excellent fighter, but these are all surface level elements. What do we know about Windu as a person? We know he doesn't trust Anakin, but there's not much more to him than that. We never really get time to know Windu in the prequels. He was more or less just a character to fill a role that any other generic Jedi could have filled. Now, let's look at Finn. What do we know about Finn as a person? Well, we know that he's still young and inexperienced as to the true horrors of war, as seen when he completely freezes during his mission. We know that he doubts his loyalty to the First Order, as seen when they massacre an entire village. We know that while he's mainly trying to run and hide, he's still a good person who isn't going to stand by as a complete stranger gets mugged. We also know that he cares about Rey, as seen when she gets captured and goes with Han and Chewie to Starkiller Base with the sole purpose of rescuing her. And we know he's brave. A former stormtrooper trying to take on the enforcer of the First Order one-on-one, knowing he's definitely outmatched, but still determined to fight to the end. I'm not saying Mace Windu is a bad character. The outside material like the Clone Wars and books like Shatterpoint certainly help build upon his personality, but when you compare how George Lucas develops a character, using a more tell-than-show method, to J.J. and Kasdan's method of learning about a character organically, the truth becomes pretty clear. Characters like Mace Windu become interesting characters when you go beyond the films. Characters like Finn, Poe, and Kylo are interesting from their introductions and stay interesting. To me, this is probably what I'll remember The Force Awakens for the most, giving us interesting characters that I wanted to follow. Aside from that, John Williams gives us a fantastic score, the effects are great, and the returning cast served their purpose very well. So does The Force Awakens hold up? Yes. Now, moving on to by far the most controversial Star Wars movie, The Last Jedi. Again, I saw The Last Jedi opening night, and I've been very vocal when I say I didn't like it much opening night, but after rewatching it multiple times, I've really grown to love this one. So what does The Last Jedi really get right? Well, for one, it gives the characters time to breathe, something that The Rise of Skywalker lacked, but we'll talk about that later. To me, the most organic way to connect the characters on screen to the audience in the seats is to let your characters grow and evolve before their eyes. Let these characters breathe and take in their environments, the sounds, smells, the feelings. The best part of the film for me is definitely everything with Luke, Rey, and Kylo. The scenes on Ahch-To alone I think make this film worth revisiting. You want to know why I find Rey to be a compelling character? A huge part of it is just how she takes everything in when she's on the island. Look at this scene right here. Do you think she's ever seen rain before in her life? Look at how fascinated she is by it. Something so simple, water. Something so hard to come by where she's from, just falling out of the sky. My mind would be blown too. Look at this scene where she's meditating on the rock with Luke. Look at how everything she describes is not only told, but visualized. Every shot gives you a sensation of what she's describing. Speaking just from a filmmaking perspective, it's excellent. And speaking of filmmaking, when it comes to the visual appeal of The Last Jedi, this is by far the best looking Star Wars film. Look at this gorgeous cinematography. Every shot tells a story. Some of these shots could be hung on a wall and turned into posters. Say what you will about Ryan as a writer, but the guy knows how to film a sequence. But yeah, let's talk about the writing. I'm not going to lie, I still do have some issues with the story, but they aren't major issues in my eyes. Look, I do think Rose, though she gets entirely too much hate, is given the short end of the stick when it comes to her dialogue and motives. Holdo, I think, was a single line of dialogue away from being a completely solid character. Had she had a line of dialogue saying that there could be a spy on board and that's why she couldn't reveal anything, I don't think anyone would have complained. Well, okay, people would have complained, but mainly the fans who just hate everything new. And probably my biggest issue with the film? No, not Canto Bight, though I do think it could have been edited better to give us a bit more time with Luke and Rey. Killing off Phasma. That's right, not Snoke. Honestly, with all the fan theories I saw leading into The Last Jedi, I was sick of speculating on who he was. Everyone thought he was Plagueis. I didn't want him to be Plagueis. The story didn't need him to be Plagueis. He's not even the same species as Plagueis. No, I think Kylo killing Snoke was a great shock and a highlight of the film. Phasma, on the other hand, was wasted. She had about 3 minutes of screen time in The Force Awakens, so why bring her back just to kill her off, especially when she could have been an excellent foil for Finn going forward? Imagine, after she's defeated in The Force Awakens, she survives and goes rogue. Her purpose now is simply to hunt down Finn. They could have had their final confrontation in the Rise of Skywalker as Finn and Janna are trying to deactivate the comm tower on the Star Destroyer. But instead, she gets a very anticlimactic end. And that's probably the worst I can really say about The Last Jedi, at least to me personally. It gave me everything I wanted from a Star Wars movie and more. I know this is not everyone's opinion, and the film does have its flaws, but none so bad that I would call it a bad movie or even a bad Star Wars movie. And something it did better than either of the other two sequels, it tried to move the story forward in a new direction and give more depth to the characters, especially Luke, who I will always stand by as having a fantastic arc in this film, along with a career-best performance from Mark Hamill. Where The Force Awakens doesn't really get any better the more I watch it, The Last Jedi does. So does The Last Jedi hold up? For me, absolutely. From both a filmmaking and a story perspective, I'd probably give The Last Jedi a solid A- or B+. But now on to The Rise of Skywalker, and I want to make something clear before I get into this, otherwise it's going to come off as far more negative than I intended to. I still do like The Rise of Skywalker, but not really in the same way I enjoy The Last Jedi or The Force Awakens. And I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. This couldn't have been an easy film to make. The Rise of Skywalker didn't have the smoothest production. Not only did they have to come up with a compelling conclusion to a 9-part saga, but they also had to work around several obstacles, the biggest of which being that Carrie Fisher was no longer with us by the time production began. And for how well they handled Leia's scenes in this film, I applaud them. Everything else, on the other hand, sort of suffers. The story, it's a mess, with Palpatine returning completely out of the blue with no build-up. It just felt like a knee-jerk reaction to the backlash from The Last Jedi. Bring the most popular villain back to appease the fans. Well, it didn't really work out too well. The effects are still great, but to go back to JJ's style of filming when Rian Johnson gave us the gorgeous cinematography in The Last Jedi, it kind of feels like a downgrade in terms of the film's general appearance. The characters? Well, Kylo, I believe, is the only major character in this film that comes out better than how he started. Kylo's redemption was handled very well in my opinion. It's clear by this point Kylo is following the dark path not because he wants to, but because he feels it's all he has, like he can't go back, and this feels like a genuine continuation from The Last Jedi. And his chemistry and story with Rey is still very well done and probably the best thing about this movie. The other characters, however, like Finn, Poe, and Rose, they all get sidelined pretty hard. Especially Finn, who was such an interesting character in the previous films and still had so much more to give. Same with Poe, but instead their characters mainly consist of one-liners and quips. Though both characters do get some great scenes, the film suffers where The Last Jedi succeeds. The Last Jedi gave the characters room to expand and grow. Whether you liked it or not, the story took its time and was far more focused than this film. You get new characters too, like Dio and Jannah, but they're not really given much to do. Same with Billy D. Williams as Lando. The characters suffer because of a bloated story that decided to try and rectify issues from the prior film rather than try to form a proper continuation and conclusion to the story. Now, with all of that negativity out of the way, there are still some great things about The Rise of Skywalker. First, even though his return was handled poorly, Ian McDiarmid returning as Palpatine was a lot of fun, especially when he gets to drop the bass. Some new characters like Zori Bliss and Babu Frick were pretty interesting. Zori actually gets one of the few quiet moments of the film with Poe, which alone makes her more memorable to me. And the film also does competently handle one story thread, and that's the dyad between Rey and Kylo. The fact that their connection through the Force is so strong that they're able to physically interact with each other while on completely different planets was amazing to me. And seeing them utilize this in the final battle was great. You might think differently, but this is my opinion. And once again, John Williams hits a home run with the score and gets a well-deserved cameo. But I think what will keep me coming back to this movie is the message that family is a lot more than blood. I see so many people complain that Rey isn't a real Skywalker without taking into account that Rey's entire arc was leading to this. She longed to have a family in The Force Awakens. This led to her being heartbroken when Kylo told her that she was nobody. Then this led to fear upon finding out her true lineage. But with Luke's words on Ahch-To that some things are stronger than blood, Rey realizes that family is not just tied to blood. For the longest time, Rey had no family. Then she found out that her only family was the most evil man in the galaxy who only wanted to use her to return to power. Does that sound like family? Now look at Luke and Leia. Two orphans, separated at birth and given to new families. The only true family either of them had left was Vader. Owen and Beru Lars loved Luke, but they weren't related to him by blood. Same with Bail Organa and his wife adopting Leia. They weren't her biological family, but they loved her as her own. Luke, upon finding out Vader was his father, would have been well within his right to go by another name other than Skywalker. As far as the rest of the galaxy was concerned, Anakin died when he became Vader, but he kept the name, in a sense honoring his father, not Vader, but the man who Vader used to be, the hero of the Republic and great Jedi Anakin Skywalker. Leia, on the other hand, even after finding out she was a Skywalker, kept the name Organa. Why? To honor the people who loved her, who raised her as their own daughter. Now look at Rey. After Palpatine's death, she has no family, only a legacy of darkness. So what does Rey do? Take the name of Skywalker. Leia knew that Rey was a Palpatine, and yet Leia showed her love and compassion and still trained her without fear of her becoming like Palpatine. Luke, though hesitant at first, still trained Rey and taught her the fundamentals of the Force and the history of the Jedi and how they fell. He then sacrificed his life to save the Resistance. Now, Rey sees something. These two people, now smiling back at her as spirits, were the closest thing she ever had to a true family. So she takes the name of Skywalker to carry on that legacy. While I do have an issue with the whole Rey Skywalker reveal scene, I actually really like the idea itself. All in all, I think The Rise of Skywalker was a mess, but not a god-awful mess. It is still a fun movie, but one that is undeniably flawed, and it's the sequel I've watched the least amount of times. But the big question is, do these three films hold up as a trilogy, and do they hold up as a continuation of the original trilogy? Well, it's complicated. I think 7 and 8 work well together, and most of 9 does too. The general story and major elements are still there and flow through the trilogy, but a lot of smaller stuff and characters tend to shift around. If there's one thing that the prequels have over the sequels, it's that they work better together as a trilogy, with a single mind behind them. And to me, that's the biggest problem with the sequels. It was clear that there were too many minds and no complete story before filming began. So does it hold up as a trilogy? Well, I would say yes, as I do think that the major elements still tie the trilogy together. Others might rightly say no. But does it hold up as a continuation of the original trilogy? Well, yes and no. The characters that carry over from the originals like Luke, Han, and Leia, I think were all handled well in the sequel trilogy. They are what make these films, to me at least, a worthy continuation. However, this new trilogy wasn't just trying to be a continuation, but a legacy trilogy as well, keeping the main focus on the next generation of heroes, a task it does competently. As I still do love the new characters, but I wouldn't say it does it perfectly, as the characters did lose some of what made them special as the trilogy went on. So what are my overall thoughts? I really liked the sequel trilogy. It certainly had its ups and downs, but I feel the same way about the prequels. Honestly, the only prequel film I still regularly watch is Revenge of the Sith, so just from a standpoint of which trilogy has more films I like to watch, it would be the sequels. However, if we're talking which trilogy works best as a cohesive story, the prequels win on that level. The original trilogy will always be up at the top in my book. The prequels and the sequels, I think, are more or less on the same level, but for different reasons. Overall, as I said, I did enjoy the sequel trilogy, and I'm also glad that, like the prequels, the sequel trilogy brought Star Wars to a whole new generation of kids. Will the sequels end up becoming more revered like the prequels over time? It's hard to say. But I have noticed that the more harsh opinions towards the sequels seem to be cooling down a touch. And not every channel is completely negative towards the sequels. Channels like AT-AT Chat, The Gold Man, and Hello Greedo have all made excellent videos defending the sequels while still giving well thought out critiques. It's nice to know that as a fan of the new films as well as the original trilogy and the prequels and the spin-offs, I'm not alone in my enjoyment of the sequel trilogy. Do I think they're perfect? No. Do I think they're the worst thing to happen to Star Wars? Absolutely not. Star Wars is always going to have its bumpy periods before you get to great periods. The prequels were a bumpy period, but then we got the Clone Wars and Rebels. The sequels were a bumpy period, but now we've got The Mandalorian and The Bad Batch and a whole slew of upcoming shows. If someone ever tells you that Star Wars is dead or insert here killed Star Wars, just tell them to give it a little while. You might find that there's a bright future just over the horizon.